Hello everyone, and welcome back to Lady Show English. I'm so glad you're here with me today. In this video, we're going to explore a fascinating food story that connects cultures from Turkey to Mexico, from ancient times to your favorite taco shop. We'll learn about the amazing journey of spit-roasted meats, and along the way, I'll teach you some useful vocabulary, phrases, and grammar that you can use in everyday English. So let's get started. Have you ever eaten a doner kebab, shawarma, or tacos al pastor? These delicious foods might seem very different, but they actually share the same cooking method. They all use meat that spins on a vertical spit while it roasts. Today, we're going to discover how this one cooking technique traveled around the world and became many different dishes. Let me start with an interesting story. Raul Morales owns a taco restaurant in Los Angeles. People call him Chef Al Pastor because he makes incredible tacos filled with seasoned pork. One day, when he was visiting Universal Studios, fans shouted his nickname across the crowd. His recipe comes from his family and goes back many generations. But the story behind his tacos is even older and more international than you might imagine. Before we continue, let's learn some important vocabulary. The word spit in this context means a long metal rod that holds meat while it cooks. It's different from the verb spit, which means to push liquid from your mouth. Another key term is roast. When we roast food, we cook it with dry heat, usually in an oven or near a fire. We can say roasted chicken or roasted vegetables. The phrase "goes back generations" means something has existed in a family for a long time, passing from grandparents to parents to children. Now that we've covered these key terms, let's explore how spit roasting has deep historical roots. Roasting meat on a spit is one of humanity's oldest cooking methods. Ancient Greek poems from thousands of years ago describe feasts with spit-roasted meat. Archaeologists have even found iron spits in old tombs from the 10th century BCE. Food historian Ken Albala explains that this cooking technique was often connected to men, hunting, and celebrations after battles. Here's something interesting about roasting: you don't cook the meat directly on top of the fire. Instead, you place it beside the fire. This creates richer, more complex flavors. As Professor Albala says, any place you have a pointy stick or a sword, people are going to figure out very quickly that if you cook with it off to the side of the fire, it's going to taste much more interesting. Let's look at some useful phrases from this section. The expression "figure out" means to understand or discover something through thinking or experience. For example, "I finally figured out how to use this app," or "Can you figure out this math problem?" Another important phrase is "off to the side," which means not in the center, but near or beside something. You might say, "Put that box off to the side," or "She stood off to the side of the stage." With these phrases in mind, let's dive into how a unique roasting technique emerged in the Ottoman Empire. Centuries ago, cooks in the Ottoman Empire developed something special. Instead of roasting whole animals, they layered thin slices of raw meat onto a vertical spit. This created a dense, cone-shaped stack that would spin and cook evenly. Food historian Mary Eisen found paintings from 1620 that show cooks slicing meat from these rotating spits at royal picnics. This wasn't street food then, it was fancy food for the upper class. The Ottomans called this dish saverm kebabi, which means turned kebab. The Ottoman Empire was enormous, stretching from Central Europe to North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. As the empire grew, this delicious cooking method spread to different regions. Over time, the word shawarma entered Arabic and became shawarma. In Turkey itself, people started using another word, döner, which also means rotating or turning. Let's examine the phrase over time. This is a very common expression that means gradually, as days, months, or years pass. For example, over time, I improved my English skills, or the city changed a lot over time. Another useful structure is stretching from X to Y, which describes something that extends across a large area. You can use it geographically. The highway stretches from New York to Boston, or with other concepts, her career stretches from the 1980s to today. Having explored these expressions, let's see how the concept of over time and cultural migration helped spread döner across the world. By the early 1800s, döner had become popular street food in Istanbul. Tourists loved it. One French traveler wrote that it was the most delicious dish in the country. Then something remarkable happened. As people migrated across continents and oceans, they took this beloved food with them. In the late 19th century, immigrants from the Ottoman Empire, many from what is now Lebanon, brought shawarma to Mexico. They opened restaurants and served what they called tacos árabes, or Arab tacos. These were usually made with lamb and served in flour tortillas or pita bread. But the story didn't stop there. The next generation of immigrants, who grew up in Mexico and felt Mexican, began creating something new. In the 1960s, in neighborhoods of Mexico City like Condesa, these young entrepreneurs started selling tacos al pastor. They made important changes to suit local tastes. They used pork instead of lamb because pork was more available and cheaper in Mexico. They created a special marinade using Mexican ingredients, pineapple, achiote, and chiles. The result was a completely new dish that honored both Middle Eastern and Mexican traditions. Here's an important grammar point. Notice how we use the past tense to tell this story. They brought, they opened, they created. When we narrate historical events, we use the simple past tense. However, when we talk about the result that continues today, we use the present perfect. The food has become popular, or the technique has spread worldwide. This shows the connection between past actions and present situations. Let's also look at the word suit. In this context, to suit means to be right for or appropriate for someone or something. We say suit local tastes, or this job suits me perfectly. Another useful phrase is instead of, which shows we're choosing one thing rather than another. For example, I'll have tea instead of coffee, or let's walk instead of taking the bus. Now that we understand these phrases, let's explore how döner was adapted to suit local tastes as it spread across Europe. Döner also traveled westward to Europe. In Greece, the dish became known as gyro, from the Greek word meaning to turn. After World War II, Turkish workers moved to Germany and brought döner with them. They adapted it to German tastes, creating a style that was different from the Turkish original. They started serving it stuffed into pita bread, making it easy to eat as a sandwich. Today, döner kebab is incredibly popular in Germany. Berlin alone has about 1,000 döner shops. Across Europe, the döner kebab industry generates €3.5 billion in revenue every year. Interestingly, this German-style döner, served in bread as a sandwich, has even traveled back to Turkey, where you can now find it in Istanbul restaurants alongside the traditional plate-style döner. The phrase travel back is interesting here. It means to return to the place of origin. This can be literal, I'm traveling back to my hometown next month, or more abstract, like in our story where a food style returns to its original country in a new form. Another useful expression is alongside, which means together with or next to. For example, she works alongside experienced colleagues, or modern buildings stand alongside historic ones. With these expressions in mind, let's see how donors' influence traveled back across the globe, evolving alongside local cuisines. Chef Raul Morales' story shows how far this food tradition has traveled. He learned to make al pastor from his uncle in Michoacán, Mexico, starting when he was just 7 years old. He moved to Los Angeles and opened his taqueria in 2001. In 2003, the Los Angeles Times named his tacos al pastor the best in the city, and customers have been coming ever since. Today, you can find al pastor tacos not just in Mexico and the United States, but in Argentina, Australia, London, and even in Levi, Finland, above the Arctic Circle. Morales isn't surprised by this global spread. As he says, people really love these al pastor tacos. And as food historian Mary Eisen observes, anything nice travels, right? You've got this tasty food, and you take it with you. This brings us to an important cultural concept: food is a living heritage. Heritage means something valuable that is passed down from previous generations. When we say living heritage, we mean traditions that are still alive, still changing, still being shared. Food is one of the most powerful ways that cultures connect and influence each other. When people move to new places, they bring their food traditions, but they also adapt them using local ingredients and local tastes. This creates something both old and new, both traditional and innovative. Having explored how food embodies living heritage, let's now revisit the key vocabulary to reinforce our understanding. Let me quickly review some key vocabulary we've learned today. Remember, learning these words and phrases will help you understand news articles and have more sophisticated conversations in English. First, we have words related to cooking: spit, roast, and marinade. Then we learned about cultural exchange with words like heritage, migrate, and adapt. We also covered useful phrases: goes back generations, figure out, over time, instead of, and alongside. One more grammar point worth noting: we often use the present perfect tense when talking about changes that happened in the past but are still relevant today. For example, food traditions have traveled around the world, or the recipe has evolved over centuries. This tense connects past and present, which is perfect for talking about cultural history. Before we finish, I want to talk about a broader theme in this story. This journey of spinning roasted meats teaches us something important about cultural identity and globalization. When people say this food is authentically Turkish or this is truly Mexican, they're talking about cultural ownership. But as we've seen, most beloved foods are actually the result of cultural mixing. Tacos al pastor are Mexican, but they wouldn't exist without Ottoman culinary traditions. Doner kebab is Turkish, but the sandwich-style version popular worldwide came from Germany. Shawarma connects the entire Middle East. None of this makes the food less authentic, it makes it more interesting and more human. In today's world, we often discuss topics like cultural appropriation, which means taking elements from another culture inappropriately, usually by a dominant culture from a minority one. But we should also celebrate cultural exchange, when people share, adapt, and appreciate each other's traditions respectfully. Food is often the most delicious example of positive cultural exchange. When we eat tacos al pastor or doner kebab, we're tasting history, migration, adaptation, and creativity all in one bite. This is why food stories matter in English learning. They're not just about vocabulary like ingredients or cooking methods. They help us understand how cultures connect, how traditions evolve, and how people build new lives while honoring their past. Thank you so much for learning with me today. I hope you enjoyed this delicious journey around the world and picked up some useful English along the way. Here at Lady Show English, I share news and stories about health, food, travel, business, technology, and the environment. These topics are close to our daily lives, and learning English through real news makes the language come alive. Every video is designed to help you improve your English while learning something interesting about our world. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to click that notification bell so you won't miss any new videos. Learning English is a journey, and I'm so happy you're taking it with me. See you in the next video. Until then, keep learning, keep exploring, and maybe try some al pastor tacos or doner kebab if you get the chance. Bye for now.